This is Unit 2, Lesson 2, Part 2. So our topic that we're going to be talking about today are the intercepts, the x-intercepts and the y-intercepts of a graph. So we've got our first little kind of introduction here. So some definitions. The point at which the graph intersects the x-axis, that's this line right here, that is known as the x-intercept. And then in the last lesson, we already talked about the y-intercept. So the point where you intersect the y-axis, this point right here, is called the y-intercept. So let's write down what those are. So the x-intercept, if we find that first, that's this point right here. So I'm going to write that as an ordered pair. The x-coordinate is -3, and the y-coordinate is 0. So when you have an x-intercept, the y-coordinate is always 0, because it's just right on this line. It's not up, it's not down, it's just right on 0. The y-intercept is this point right here. That is 0 for x, and then a +4 for y. So 0 for x, +4 for y. So y-intercept, the x-coordinate is always 0. So we're going to use that idea in the lesson while we're walking through and figuring out how to find x and y-intercepts. So the main idea we're going to be using is that for the x-intercept, the y-coordinate is always 0, and for the y-intercept, the x-coordinate is always 0. The x-intercepts, you might also hear me refer to them as a root, a 0, or a solution to the equation. All right, so you can see any of those, x-intercept, root, 0, solution. So as the year goes on, as the units go on, you'll hear me using more of those names. All right, so now finding them by hand, that's what it means to find something algebraically. So this is what I was just saying up above. To find the x-intercept, set the y-coordinate equal to 0, because we know that's always going to be true. Then you can solve for x. And the opposite is true for the y-intercept. If you want to find the y-intercept, you set the x-coordinate equal to 0, and then solve for y. So then you'll have 2 points, and once you have 2 points, you'll get a good enough idea of what the line looks like. You can just connect the dots. All right, so this equation right here, we'll do one little sample, find the x and y intercepts. So to find the x-intercept, you set y equal to 0. So we're gonna start there. So the x-intercept, take this equation, set the y equal to 0, and then solve. So to solve for x, I would start by subtracting 5 from both sides, and then divide both sides by that -2. So this, I get x by itself. Remember, we always want to write it as an ordered pair. So -5 divided by -2, that's 5/2, and we knew the y-coordinate was 0. So that is our x-intercepts. Our y-intercepts set x equal to 0. So here we'll do our y-intercepts. So we do y equals, this one's always a little bit easier. So I just plug in 0 for x, and then I immediately know what y is. So this is 0, and then +5 means that I get 5. So for an ordered pair, I knew that my x-coordinate was 0, and I just figured out that y is 5. So those are 2 ordered pairs. So now in these directions down below, we're going to do a couple of these examples, and once you find your x and y intercepts, you just plot them and then connect the dots. So that's all the directions say to do. Find both the intercepts and then graph using those 2 intercepts. So let's look at number 2. We'll start by finding the x-intercepts. So for the x-intercept, you plug in 0 for y, and then solve for x. So first thing we're going to do to get x by itself is subtract this 2 from both sides. So subtract 2, and then when we subtract 2 from the right, it cancels. So now I have this fraction here. I picked this one on purpose. To get rid of a fraction, what you do is you multiply by its reciprocal. So the reciprocal of this would be 5 over -6. So you multiply both sides by 5 over -6. Because that makes these cancel, makes these cancel, and then the x is by itself. So this, when I multiply this out, the negatives cancel, and 2 over 6 reduces down to 3. So I get 5/3. So 5/3 is my x-coordinate, and I know that 0 is my y-coordinate. So that is 1 2/3. So when we're plotting this over here, 5/3 is about 1 2/3. You just kind of give your best approximation for where that's going to be over on your coordinate system. Past 1, but not quite 2. And the other one we find is the y-intercepts. So the y-intercept, you plug in 0 for x, and then solve for y. So y equals, plug in 0 for x, and then solve for y. So this one's just as easy as the one up above. This is just 0, so you know that y is just equal to 2. So ordered pair, 0 for x, and then we just found that it's 2 for y. So 0, 2 would be up 2 units right here. And then once you have those 2 points, literally all you do is just connect the dots between those 2 points, keep it going all the way to the edges of the coordinate system, put your arrows on both sides, and that is what your line would look like. So just a different way to sketch based on what we did in the previous lesson. So we'll look at that one. We're gonna look at a couple more on the next page as well. Next one we'll look at is number 4. This will be a nice short lesson. So number 4, you don't have to change the form. That's something that people get mixed up about. So to find the x and y intercept, you do not have to change the form. So whatever form it's in, you just leave it and you just find the x and y intercepts that way. So my x-intercept here, I plug in 0 for y. So I have 4x minus 0 is equal to 8. So that just means 4x is equal to 8. So divide both sides by 4. This is just an x, and 8 divided by 4 is 2. So remember, write it as an ordered pair every time, just to remind yourself. So 2 is the x coordinate, and I knew that 0 was the y coordinate. So I can plot that. 2, 0 is the point on the x-axis over there. Then I can also find my y-intercept. So my y-intercept, I do the opposite. I want to solve for y, so I sub in 0 for x, and then solve for y. So this is just a 0. That means I have minus y is equal to 8. And then to get y by itself, I would divide both sides by that -1. So this is just a y, and then divide this by a -1, negative 8. So I knew my x coordinate was 0, and I just figured out my y coordinate was a -8. So I can plot that point. So on the y-axis, I go down 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Looks like all the way down at the ends there. So that's a -8. So really all I need is 2 points. And so I just connect the dots all the way through the coordinate system, arrows on both ends, and that's your line. Positive slope, pretty steep. All right, let's look at one more. I want to show you the one with fractions as well. So like I said, short notes today. So start with the x-intercepts. So we want to solve for x first, which means we're plugging in 0 for y. Plug in 0 for y, -2. So this is just a 0. So that means this is 3/4 times x is equal to -2. So remember, to get rid of a fraction, like we saw on the previous page, you are going to multiply by the reciprocal. So we multiply by 4/3. Do that on both sides. So these cancel, that leaves the x by itself. So this I end up with, think of this like 2/1. I get -8/3. So my x coordinate is -8/3, and I know my y coordinate is 0. So if it helps you to think of it as a decimal, -8/3 is -2 2/3. So I can go -1, -2, and 2/3. You know, just kind of give a good decimal approximation of where that would be. And the y-intercepts, we plug in 0 for x this time, so 3/4 times 0 minus 1/3 y is equal to -2. So this is just a 0. So this would be -1/3 y is equal to -2. And this is a fraction again, so just like I did over here, multiply by the reciprocal to get that to clear out. So these cancel, the y is by itself. And this, my negatives cancel, and 2 times 3 is 6. So my y coordinate is a 6, and I knew my x coordinate was a 0. So plot that on the y-axis. I'm going to do 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Okay, so 2 points is enough. We just connect the dots, arrows on both sides. All right, so just kind of a quick little lesson today.